How's it going, guys? This is James from Elite Rappers. I have Gino here. We're going to be going over a mirror that he just wrapped and just kind of see where he had troubles and where we can maybe fix or correct some of the things that he got going on. So if you could explain to me how you went about wrapping this mirror.
All right, so first off, I started wrapping in the more recessed areas, so that way the tension is not as heavy over here.
Okay.
Conformed the material down onto over here, tucked everything, post-heated. Had a little troubles down here, thinking about putting a seam, but wanted to get your general idea on that part. Overall, basic stretching, heating, tucking, cutting. Got that part down.
So what was it that was here that gave you the problem?
The wrinkles, tension, fingering starting to happen early.
Okay.
So I decided not to just force it down and maybe put the seam, is what I'm thinking.
The only problem with putting a seam here now is that your seam is going to be facing upwards. So when the water does rain or the water comes off of this, it's going to be hitting that edge. So that's the only issue about seaming it after the fact. If you maybe had planned the mirror out ahead of time, that maybe now we can redo this mirror. And now that you notice that you may have a slight difficulty in this area, yes, you could maybe add a seam down here. Instead of maybe doing it the color of the car that you're doing, maybe make this black. You know, just to kind of throw it off a little bit and maybe change it up. But the proper way to maybe about doing this mirror in one piece, yes, where you maybe started here might have been key, but I would have brought it down a little bit lower and kind of started off it more in this area here
in the corner
and stretch this way. So I would tack here, warm my material slightly, and then got my stretch among this line or this area. And then from there, the material would probably evenly stretch out from there, and maybe even having the mirror back to this position may help off because you wouldn't have that nub right here in your way. That might have gave you a little bit of a difficulty too because the material couldn't stretch naturally when you would have came from this point of starting and stretching from there.
I see. That way I feed it this way, this material would just naturally rest up. I got you.
So let's go ahead and remove this. We'll take this off and then we'll go ahead and do it. I'm not saying the proper way, but the right way. We'll just do this together.
Yeah. If I can, let's see how they remove this too.
So your material itself makes a big difference. If you have a small piece, you never want to work with a small piece that is just about the shape of the mirror. Something about, say, the wheel well size shape from maybe cutting down your material when you're doing your fenders. It's probably like a good size of material to work with.
You're saying like, you can use the excess material from the fender?
So when you're trimming down your fenders, you don't have to always strip off all the paper at one time and then you already use up that material. It's best to kind of cut down your panel as a profile, and then you have material left over that will come from here, and then you can use it for your mirrors, your door handles, and other random stuff in the car.
That's slick.
So I'm going to peel this back and off, and my location, the starting point, we're going to be down in this corner first, okay? I'm going to peel this, and we're going to tack down in this corner first.
So you're going deep recess?
Yes.
Okay.
Might as well start in the hardest location first, being that that tension there is going to be distributed in other areas. So I'm going to remove my paper, lift up slightly, make sure that corner is still tacked. Start at that corner and then just slowly work my way out to warm up the film. I'm going to lift and ride that plane that I had talked about. And then from there, I can lift up and reposition the film slightly to move it around to where I need to position the film. And then I want to open up all my material here. And you see like where you had a difficulty here where you couldn't set, notice how it kind of set itself when I made that stretch?
Correct.
Now all this is just laid in place. So I'm gonna kind of glass it out as much as I can. I'm not using any heat at the moment. So I want to make sure everything is laid. Take my squeegee. I'm gonna lift. Just kind of work my material in. And then I want to lift my perimeter. So I want to get rid of some of this excess film that I have around the edge. And when the material bunches up on itself, you want to make sure you want to unbunch it or just cut it off. So I got my material on my perimeter. I'm going to lift my perimeter now. And I'm going to warm it up slightly just to remove some of that tension that I have on this perimeter, on this edge. So kind of let this cool down. Let that cool for a little bit, go back with my squeegee. I want to lift and just kind of gently work it in as much as I can. Lift and work it in. Come to the top side. Work my edge, work my perimeter, see if I have a channel in here, if I have to work it in or not. And then the thing, being that this mirror has these little ridges, I tend to want to start at these ridges first. One more time, lift up my edges. Warm it one more time to make sure I get out all my shrinkage. So this is like your post-heating aspect of it. So whatever is going to lift should lift now. So if you don't see the material moving around anymore, you know it's post-heating. It's reached that maximum temperature that it needs to be at. So you see nothing moving no more. I'll let this cool down, maybe go start on the other mirror now, and then come back, and then after this is cooled down, I'll go back and trim everything out.
Understood.
So before I go about trimming it, is there any other questions that you might have asked?
Yeah, so on what I stated, I was planning on putting a seam here, but after watching you do it, if I started in a more recessed area, kind of gave the material the feeding it needed, I could have done that in one piece, pre-planed it.
You know, it's just a matter of reading the film, knowing your limits, and knowing just starting points with certain materials or film. And it's just typically you want to start here first, and when you get that stretch and it goes along this plane here, it will typically distribute the film where you kind of need it to go. So once you kind of lay this, as you saw, it kind of just already fed itself into that ridge already.
I did.
But to maybe change things up a little bit, yes, you could have maybe added a little bit of black here a little bit first, and then did the mirror cap in the color that you are wrapping the vehicle in, just to kind of change up the look a little bit, if you have difficulty getting a mirror to lay down like that.
Understood.
So going about cutting, anybody can kind of lay the film. You're only as good as your last cut, you know? So you really have to really make sure that when you're trimming and cutting, you kind of know where or what side to cut on. So for the bottom here, you just want to have maybe 1 or 2 clicks of your blade out, and just want to make sure where your edges start and begin. So you can take your hard part of your squeegee and kind of define these edges down here so you have an idea of where your edges are. So I want to make sure I got a fresh blade, always on a fresh cut so we'll snap and break it. We're going to take our blade, run it against the bottom of the mirror cap, and just slightly just run our blade across. Keep in mind of how much of the blade is there. You don't want to have too much of the blade to maybe score or cut some of the other plastics behind it.
Now you keeping a straight line. I was a little shaky. How do you
So what you can do is take your finger and maybe set it up against the edge of a panel and be able to use that as maybe like a tripod as different things, right? So I can kind of just take my hand,
Like a stabilizer.
stabilize it by having my middle finger up against the body, and then I'm just running my blade and my finger at the same time. I'm putting maybe a little more pressure on my finger than the blade.
I see, I see.
And then I can remove my material here, and then I can rotate the mirror without catching this edge. And now I can kind of get to the back side here if I need to. So I get my blade in here, I'm putting my finger up against the mirror cap to be able to trim. And take your time. Maybe don't want to zoom in here. And now that I have everything trimmed out, I'm going to go back with my heat source and just kind of slowly go around the perimeter and make sure that I don't have any lifting or bottle caps or anything happening on the edge. And typically that should happen now. So if you see in that little corner right there, that little corner kind of lifted. So I can go back at this time and just kind of take my squeegee and flatten out the wrinkle. I'll take my heat source again, warm it up. It doesn't look like it's moving anymore. I'll take my finger, I'll give it a mush, kind of set back, and then I'll go about heating the rest. One more time with the post heating. Let that cool down, go to the other side, finish that mirror, and then you're good to go.
Real clean. Understanding the material is important.
Typically mirrors, door handles, and bumpers are typically your failure points because they're so organic. There's a lot of stretch that goes into these things. And typically people don't post heat them. You always want to remember to go back, post heat your edges, because if you don't post heat, you saw when I was posting it, how the edges were just curling up. Imagine just wrapping it, cutting it, taking the car outside for the first time, right before your customer might be coming to pick up the vehicle, and everything's going to pop up. You know, so that's typically their failing point. And typically the mirrors and handles are the last thing people do when they wrap cars. And by then you're kind of tired and frustrated already. So you're kind of rushing through it. So you're not really taking your time. So you want to really make sure you take your time on these because you don't want your customer coming back on a failure.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I think I understand how it would be redone.
All right, cool. Go do the other side now.
Thank you.